I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theatre scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theatre scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theatre creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you value the work that I do on Stageworthy, please consider leaving a donation either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Stageworthy is created entirely by me, and I give it to you free of charge with no advertising or other sponsored messages. Your continuing support helps me to cover the cost of producing and distributing the show. Just 4 people donating $5 a month would help me cover the cost of podcast hosting alone. Help me continue to bring you this podcast. You can find a link to donate in the show notes, which you can find in your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. Reba Terlson is a multidisciplinary artist based in Winnipeg. She joined me to talk about her solo show, Keeping the Moon, at the Winnipeg Fringe starting July 20th. In this conversation, we talk about what prompted her to create a solo show, how she decided to incorporate movement and dance into the show, her love of astrology, and much more. Here's our conversation. The show is Keeping the Moon.
Yes, it is.
And you'll be performing that at the Winnipeg Fringe Festival.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about Keeping the Moon.
Sure. So it's so funny when I talk about this show because I think that it has become something that it might not have been originally once upon a time. I think once upon a time, I was explaining this to someone in 2020. I had a friend who was like, oh, let's create this like sort of online, like fringe kind of, basically like a fringe festival, but it was supposed to all be online and it had a theme. And the theme was that it was going to be moon-based, whatever that meant to anyone. And so at the time I was like, oh, it would be cool if I would do a solo show that had the moon and just talked about the different phases of the moon and the transitions and how they can kind of relate to a lot of different things in our lives, like how we go about in the world, mental health and all of that stuff. And then, I don't even think that festival ever ended up happening. And then I just kind of stuck with that idea. And I wanted to do a solo show eventually. And I was like, well, I could mess around with that. I could do that. So I think what came about it was, so my character's name is Luna, because she is named after the Roman goddess of the moon. And that is that I've done a lot of moon research. If anyone wants to fact check me, I've been doing moon research since about 2021. So yeah, it's about her and her difficult relationship with her mother, and kind of we see that happening as we transition through different phases of the moon, which are throughout the show. So you get to know about Luna and her journey. And also I put a lot of my research into this show. I put a lot of moon stuff in this show that people, I hope that they're like, she didn't just make that up. Trust me, I did not make it up. Lots of research.
One of the things that I find is sometimes you could make something up and everybody would be like, this is really, really well researched.
Yeah.
For the one person who because most people don't know. You tell them something and they'll believe it, but you'll know.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you started with this as an idea. Sort of the way you're describing it, a sliver of an idea that would involve like the phases of the moon.
Yeah.
At what point did you start to build a character on it to sort of expand it and sort of examine a mother-daughter relationship? At what point in the writing process did that come in?
Well, that's so interesting because I think Luna was always there, and her mental health was always there. And I think when I started writing, I was like, the way my brain doesn't write plot very well. I could just kind of write into the void and not have the pivotal plot things that you kind of see in traditional like novels or like a hero's journey or anything like that. So my dramaturgists along the way have really helped me with that. But yeah, so when I started the writing process, I was like, okay, I want each scene to be a phase of the moon, and each phase means something different. So that is going to influence what she does, how she feels in that scene, and kind of, if we call it the action of that scene, is going to be influenced by whatever phase of the moon that we're in. And then the mother-daughter thing was interesting because I didn't necessarily go into it intending for it to be as strong as it become, but in an earlier draft, I think when I was like probably struggling with plot points, my dramaturg was like, they picked out the mother-daughter relationship thing and went, well, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. Let's see what that is. And so that's kind of how it came about more, where I'm like, oh, okay, like I can, if that's what you're interested in, then if that's what you're curious about, then I will definitely write more of that. And so that's kind of how it became more about this mother-daughter relationship than I think I had originally intended.
It's funny how these things start with a little something and then more interesting thing, like more deeper things come in as time goes on, and where you thought you were going to go is nowhere like where you end up.
Yeah, it feels like a very, just from my brain to where it is now, it's a very different show. But I think it's okay. And I think, you know, thinking about it to myself, that's how plays should be if you have enough time.
Yeah. I think that's part of the process too. Yeah. That's like you start with something small and it should expand. It should grow as time goes on.
And it is a way better show than earlier drafts of it, than even I think I thought it would be at the beginning of like my 2020, 2021. And it's also funny to me. And I'm like, is it a better show just because of the amount that I've edited it or dramaturged it? Or is it a better show because I've sat with it a lot longer than any other show I've done? I like had this idea again in 2020 and then started to really like write, I guess, in what year are we in? 2023. So I was like, gosh, the COVID is messing me up now.
What is it? What is time?
What is time?
What do we all don't like. If you try to think back over the COVID years, it's either a year, 2 years, 3, like it's 4 years or 1 year. I don't know how long that period was.
Yeah, I think so. It was like in my brain for a long time, and then I started like having to physically write it in 2022. I think that was and then because. And then I got the artist residency in 2021. So then that was interesting because then that was when I had a beautiful amount of time to research all of the things that have ended up in the show. Because I had a month to just kind of make art. It was lovely. It was like the best time ever. Then I left it. I came home, went back to my job, got a new job, like kind of, and then left it again until maybe like December of that year, like of the next year. Like it was, so it's been an interesting journey for sure, writing wise anyway.
But it can be good to put something down and come back to it, right?
Yeah.
There's distance from a thing, lets you look at it in a fresh way.
Yeah, definitely. It's been, and I'm so glad, like, I think Winnipeg did this weird thing where I know a bunch of Fringe festivals last year were like, hey, clean slate, you can all apply, again, because of COVID. But Winnipeg held on to the people that applied in 2019. And in 2019, I wanted to take a break from doing shows at the Winnipeg Fringe, so I didn't apply. And then COVID happened. So I didn't have a show last year, and I was like, oh, like it's been so long since I have performed. So it's going to be really interesting getting back into it.
It's a weird feeling. I did my first performance last summer at the Fringe in St. John, New Brunswick.
Oh, congratulations.
And it just felt weird to be in front of an audience again.
Yeah, I bet.
It felt like you hear about sailors getting their sea legs back. It kind of felt a little bit like that, finding the cadence and interacting with an audience instead of digital people.
Yeah, it's so different. But that's so cool, especially like that you did it in New Brunswick. That's really cool.
It's a good fringe to try out something new in.
Oh, nice.
I don't like to. I mean, it's a very warm fringe.
Yeah,
but it's kind of low stakes.
Yeah, for sure.
If you bomb, nobody at home is really going to hear about it. So
I also feel that way about the Regina Fringe Festival. God bless Regina Fringe Festival. They're always there. It's like it's so tiny, it's so cute, and it happens over. I mean, it used to. Now I think because I have some friends doing it this year, that it hasn't quite started yet, but it used to happen over like Canada Day weekend, and it's like, oh, let's come see some theater, even though there might be other activities happening. And I'm like, oh, Regina, you're trying so hard.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
Yeah. No, it's also the Fringe in St. John. Actually, at this point, there was no media coverage, there's no reviews.
Oh wow, so it's really low stakes then, isn't it?
Really low stakes. Like it's not like anybody. If the show bombed, nobody would search it and find a bad review because there weren't any. So it was really it's like I could fail. I could fall flat on my face. Fortunately, it went well.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad.
Now you mentioned always wanting to do a solo play.
Yeah.
What is it? What was your inspiration? What made you want to do a solo play?
Oh, that's so interesting. I'll probably say that to every one of your questions because I'm just like, oh, that's so, just things you don't think about. I think I had done enough shows. I think it's twofold in that I had done enough shows with like really small casts because I like doing it that way, because if I can get the opportunity to pay people well, then I would like that, versus if I had a cast of like 10 people or, more than that. And then you're like, oh, everyone gets like $40. I'm so sorry. And I also think it's part of doing Fringe so much as now and kind of learning things, and that I like to be in control a lot and people's schedules and things like that. And so if I only have to schedule like myself and a director and a stage manager, then that's perfect because, it's way less scheduling conflicts. So I think all of those things, I wanted to challenge myself because I think I like a challenge. And a million years ago, when I first started doing Fringe, and I became friends with Sam Mullins, who lives in Toronto now. And he lived in Toronto, I think, at the time as well.
Mm-hmm.
But he used to do, obviously, a bunch of solo shows. And we became friends. And we were always talking about theater and Fringe and all of that stuff. And I think, this was like, I was, like 25, I think, when we met. Like, now I'm much older than that. But I think I was just like, wow, that's so cool that like, I think I want to do that. Like, I think I want to, but I was too scared. And I was like, I don't think I could do that. And he was like, you can do it. He's like, I think you could do it. So like a million years later, down doing it.
First off, do you remember what play of his you saw, or did you get to see one of his shows?
I've seen many of his shows.
Okay.
So I've seen Weak Sauce. I saw, I think it's called Grandma's Dead or something, which is another one. And his Tyrannosaurus Rex show that I don't...
Tinfoil Dinosaur.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was like, that wasn't the title of the show, but I was like, something about that. So yeah, no, we're really great friends now, which is just the best. So...
There's a funny thing about, I'd wanted to do a solo show ever since I first read Wild Abandon by Danny McIver.
Oh, cool.
And I just read it, and it was great. And then it took me years to be able to start writing it. Right.
Yeah.
And I was as intimidated as you were about the idea of standing alone on a stage and performing until I finally did.
Yeah.
But I found writing, and tell me if you found this, is writing a solo play was a very different process from writing a straight up play.
Yeah, it's a lot of, I think for me, the challenge was like, I really love writing dialogue. I really love, like, you can easily create conflict with dialogue, I think, because there's two people or however many people you're writing. So I'm grateful that I did some workshops, I think, around some like solo shows and stuff to kind of be able like, and my dramaturge helped me a lot with this. She was like, what's the turning point? What's the inner conflict? All of these things. So, but I did find it more challenging because I was like, okay, you kind of have to create like, I guess like, to me, you have to create more inner conflict. You have to create conflict with your environment to have stakes because there's not another person on stage with you. So you have to like, and for me, I think it was more about creating more of a world than I have had to before, because I think mostly I've written like 2 or 3 person and you can easily create, for me anyways, you can easily like just have that quick banter and create conflict. And then where's the conflict if you don't have another person?
Yeah.
So I think for Keeping the Moon, I have a lot of, I would say like inner conflict, but I do have like voiceovers that are her mother. I have people off stage that you don't see that she has conversations with, because I think for me, I couldn't not write that because I just couldn't not even if you never see the other characters that I've created, but I couldn't not create other characters. So I think the challenge was like, okay, but I have to do this by myself. So I can't you can never physically see them. I had to like really incorporate the fact that you couldn't physically see other people that I'm talking to.
For me, when I'm writing a play that has multiple characters, I start at the beginning and I work through to the end.
Yeah.
That's always how it works for me.
Yeah.
Writing solo.
Yeah.
I take a notebook and I start to write about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And once I fill that notebook, I transcribe it. I start to type it into my computer.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, I learn what's forming here. Is there a character here? At that point, I find a beginning and I start to like arrange things, right?
Yeah.
They may change, but it's so non-linear as opposed to when I write a straight up play.
Yeah.
To me, there's like different types of writing call for different processes.
Yes, definitely.
That was how I learned to work, because I tried starting from the beginning and working through about 20 times for my first solo play, and it just didn't work for that. When you were writing this, how many drafts did you do on your own before you worked with a dramaturg?
That's funny, because I had my dramaturg right away because she was supposed to be my director, and she's such an amazing writer. And then she moved to Edinburgh for a year. So we quickly realized that she could not be my director.
Right.
But she was kind of in it from like the start of my writing process, where I was like, hey, like, or like, I would write things, and then she would like send me back notes of like, it was kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like, oh, I'm curious about that. What would happen if I want to see more of that? This doesn't work. And she would just she asked me what I needed. And I was like, I would love like writing prompt in the way of like, what do you think is working? What isn't working? And again, I think the idea of this mother-daughter relationship came from one of her notes of being like, I really want to know what that is. And that was the conflict between the mother and daughter that I then expanded into the entire play.
Right.
So I'm super grateful for her. Her name is Lindsay, and she's amazing. And so I had her from the start, and then my director, who I have now, Megan Phillips, is also amazing. And kind of when we started rehearsing, it was kind of even more levels of, because she also does dramaturgy, and so then I basically reworked everything in like May and June. So we had a final script 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's been, like I say, this is the most that I have ever edited a play, one of my plays anyway.
But it's, it's good that you have like your finished script. I remember when I first started writing a solo play, the first piece of advice I got was from my friend Jeanette Moore, who'd done solo plays. And she said, the most important thing that you can do when you're writing this thing is decide when you are done being the writer.
Yes, that's something that's amazing, because that is something that that Megan has kind of tried to instill in. Like when we were in rehearsal, she would like refer to like my writer brain as writer Reba, and then like my actor brain as like, and then she would tell me like, oh, switch off your writer brain or switch off your actor brain, or so that was really helpful to try to kind of like, and currently right now I'm like only an actor brain. I can't go back to being like, but what do they want? And what about this thing? I don't know. I don't care.
No, and it's fascinating to be able to make that break, to say, now I am the actor, and somebody will be like, well, what about this? What does it mean? What did the playwright? You'd be like, just like, I don't know, I have to make it up now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I can't go back and fix it. Now I have to make it up.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. And I think in the past it's been really nice to have a director to be like, let us distinguish when you have to do one thing and when you have to do another thing, because I think a lot of our early on rehearsal process was her asking me like writer questions, which is good, and it was good, but then eventually having to be like, okay, I have to shut that part of my brain off, or I'm never going to be able to act in this thing.
No, because the writer keeps wanting to change things.
Yeah.
Quote unquote working.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like you're never sitting in the performance. You're always editing.
Yes. Oh
so
gosh.
Yeah.
That was, luckily I've been lucky. I've never done that when I've performed. I've always been really an actor brain when I've done fringe festivals, like on stage, but that would be terrible, I think.
Yeah. I've made it a rule for solo plays that I'm performing that I never make changes.
Yeah.
Until I'm getting ready to produce again.
Yeah.
Then I'll think about what worked, what didn't, and I'll tweak, and I'll write maybe some new bits and things like that.
Yeah.
Only one time an improv moment made it into the show and stayed in for the rest of a run.
Oh,
but like
interesting.
Nothing has ever, like, I don't edit until I'm like done and about to get ready to produce again.
Yeah.
It's just too much. And also when I'm done performing, I'm like, I need to let this sit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's great advice.
Because I found an audience teaches you so much about, like, it's
really
one thing
do.
when you are, like, if you're a playwright and you're watching other people perform it, the audience is teaching you about the show. Yeah. But when you're in it, when you're performing it, the audience is still teaching you, but it's a very different relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I've appreciated, because I think, again, 3 or whatever, how many drafts ago that was, when I started rehearsal with Megan, I was really worried about tone, because my play also talks about anxiety and kind of my character takes medication. You kind of know that right away when you see it, so it's not a surprise. So I was really worried about it being like not necessarily like a downer thing, because I think these are important things to talk about, but I think that also I was really concerned with, oh, are people going to come into this and be like, oh, this play is really depressing? Like, I just feel really heavy when I watch this show. And so I think with having earlier conversations about that with Megan, she's been great because she put a lot of like more jokey things in this show than were originally there. She like wrote, kind of helped me rewrite some things to make them funnier, because I do like doing comedy, and I think comedy comes a bit more naturally to me. So she's been great in like being like, okay, let's make this thing funny, let's make this thing funny, so it doesn't feel like you're watching hopefully like a really I don't know, depressing play about a mother-daughter relationship. Right. Because I don't know, my character's awkward. She doesn't know what she's doing, and she's just really, I think she's very socially awkward. So like that comes with, that's going to be funny to watch on stage when she tries to interact with other people, and she doesn't have the social cues or the social skills to really flourish in that environment.
One of the things that is kind of funny as a performer of solo plays is, especially at a Fringe festival, when you're talking to people about a solo show, you could sort of see people, you start to talk about your solo show, and suddenly people, you could sort of see it in their eyes. Oh, great, another autobiographical show. And so I found,
You're not wrong.
No, I know, and it's such a stereotype. But I found that I had like my pitch had to be like, what can I say that proved that this is not an autobiographical show?
Yeah,
because I've been in that situation where somebody comes up and they're like, "Can I tell you about my show?" It's the story of me overcoming X, and it's
right.
Okay, right, and so unless the pitch is really good, but like you could sort of see people like making that jump as soon as you mentioned solo show. And you also, like, your show is not autobiographical.
No, it's not. No.
And but again, it's also fantastical. So that sort of gives you a way of talking about this show that sort of reassures people that it's not another autobiographical show.
Well, it's so funny. I think I talked to a friend of mine like way, way earlier when we were talking about plays and, writing stuff for this year. And at the time, I think what he didn't realize was the show that I was planning on writing was like a play. I was not going to write a solo show about Reba's life and Reba's like struggles or my whatever. I was like, no. Like, I'm writing a character. I am writing something that has like a hero's journey plot devices. And so it's funny because you're right, a lot of solo shows are autobiographical, but I think hopefully if I handbill, who's to say, but I don't think I would tell people it was a solo show because of that. It can be a very visceral reaction where it's like, oh, great, you're right, like another solo chef. I think I would. And because I think what helps is that any other show I've done has been like a play with characters.
Right.
And so this is that same, I didn't stray from that. It's just now there's only me on stage versus before there was like other people on stage.
Yeah.
And as I always say, or as always my dad interjects when I tell people about my show, because I mean, currently I don't have another tagline, but currently my tagline is, it's a show about mother-daughter toxic relationships, because it is. And then my dad will say, but it's not your relationship with your mother. And I'm like, well, you're right, it's not. I think my relationship with my mother will influence how I act certain things, but it's these are two very different people that I made up.
Yeah.
Like, I have anxiety, so Luna and I have that in common, but I am very extroverted and like bubbly and social and all of these things that Luna isn't. So we both have anxiety. That's about the only thing I think that is the same. And anyone that like knows me would also, I think, agree that like if they see the play, they'll be like, oh, like that's not who Reba is. I'm not that person. So, and again, the mother person that I created, you never see her because she's not there.
Right.
She's meant to be an absentee mother, and my mother is not that person. So yeah, it's just all in my mind.
Yeah. It's interesting about the pitch. You mentioned like not mentioning that it's a solo show, and I think that's the least that piece of information is the least important piece of information that people need to know, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What they need to know is what is your hook, what is that sort of thing, and so once you've come up with that, they'll figure out it's a solo show when they look and they see only one performer. They don't need to know that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like with my other plays, I've just tried to describe like the plot that would want to grab them. One Date City was really easy with that because it was like, have you ever had a terrible dating experience? Of course you have. Would you like to come and see us act out terrible dating experiences on stage? Of course you would. So that one was easy, but it still was like, you know, it's still a play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's movement and dancing in this show.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And I want to, because you started dancing, and I think you mentioned that you were on the show back in 2020.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you were, dancing, but that you'd started in 2020. Terrible timing, by the way.
Oh, I know.
But did you continue dancing throughout the pandemic, or were there online? Yeah,
I did. My dance studio switched to online when we had like really intensive code red, and they had to shut down the studio. And then when those were lifted, I went back to dancing in person, but we just had mask mandate. So that's kind of how I feel about people that are like, oh, masks. And I'm like, you can't even complain if you have never exercised with the mask on, because that is the most torturous thing I can, because it is, you can't breathe. Like, you can breathe because, you won't die, but it's very, very difficult, especially if you're wearing N95 masks. So I was just like, really, you can't wear a mask in like a grocery store where you're pushing a cart and doing very minimal exercising, where I'm like, running around and doing cardio and yoga in a mask. And it's like, really, you can't just like push a grocery cart with a mask on.
Yeah. But as far as like dance in this show or movement in this show, at what point did you figure out that was going to be a big part of this, or was it always going to be that part of your life?
My dream was that it was always going to be a part of it. And then earlier on in the process, I think, when I was applying for residencies and stuff, and earlier on, I had a different choreographer who became busy, so she was unable to do it. So now I have a different choreographer. But it was always important to me that, because I think a part of me is like, it's because I want to incorporate more movement in my shows. And a part of me is that because I love watching dance and I love going to see dance shows, I think they're so interesting because it's a different way of telling a story. And I will also say the handy plot device, because I do dancing and then I don't have to talk. I have two of them. I have two scenes where I know I don't have to talk. And that is beautiful. So that was also in my mind. But I was like, oh, if I do these, then I have to memorize less. So
listen, and I think a lot of people don't know how difficult it is to learn lines for a solo show that you've written.
Oh my goodness. It's another beast entirely.
Because, I mean, and I learned that use a different part of your brain for writing than you do for learning the lines. And
Yeah.
it's going to be easy for you to learn the lines. You wrote it, and you're like, it's the harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm really, I feel guilty because I'm really good at memorizing things. So it is something I will put off to the very last minute because I know my brain can memorize things really quickly. Like, for example, we had a rehearsal this week where, I think now technically I've been off book for like less than a week. And my director was like, you were way more off book than I thought you were going to be. And I'm like, oh, you have vastly underestimated my memorizing skills. I'm like, it is, I will say it's a lot easier to memorize for me, like dialogue. Like, it's a lot easier to memorize. Like, this person talks and then I talk, and then this person talks and then I talk.
There are cues. There are cues.
Everything now is like a cue to myself, and I'm like, oh no. And this is in improv. I'm like, as it can be as improvised, I guess, if the audience wouldn't know, but
not good to your stage manager if you go too far. But
no,
I have resorted to so many tricks to try to learn and relearn the lines of my solo shows.
Oh man, what tricks do you have?
So I first off, just like reading it out loud as many times as I can before I start to drive myself crazy.
Interesting.
And then after a while, I record it.
Yeah, I've done that. I've done that too.
And I listen to it in place of podcasts.
Yes, I've done that too. Yeah.
And we're walking around listening to it just to try to put it in the subconscious, in the back of my brain, so that it's there.
Yeah.
And just like repeating sections.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Just repeating a section until it sticks.
Yeah.
So, because again, it's like if you're in a play, you can run lines with somebody, like or a friend. Whereas in a solo play, you're basically, can you listen to me?
Yeah. And it's so funny because normally I think I would ask someone, like, because my dad and I have written a lot of shows together. Normally I would just be like, oh, hey, like, because we've written them together, I would be like, oh, let's run lines if my other actors can't be here because you know it. But this script, he hasn't seen any of it because I just wrote it by myself. And so I don't really want to be like, hey, do you want to, like, quote unquote, see my show, which is not really seeing my show, but it is me trying to memorize my lines in front of you. And I'm like, nobody really wants that. Like,
no, and it's awkward for everybody because this is a person essentially watching this show as you stumble in the wilderness.
But I do say, like, I wish I was the type of person that I could, like, memorize, like, lines, like, in public. I cannot. Like, I have to be, like, at home in my room saying my lines out loud to myself. Like, that has to be the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the same, like, because I don't find value in not saying it out loud.
Yeah.
I can whisper it. Like, you can whisper it, but then if you're outside, you still kind of look.
No. You
should be doing that at home.
And I think, like, one of the interesting things that I found, I think, just with this one, and sometimes I've done it with other plays, but it's easier because there's dialogue. But for this one, I've found that it sticks in me more if I am doing something. If I am, like, so, like, the other day when I was, like, memorizing for most of the day, I was, like, cleaning. And because I was moving around, all I had to do, I was still talking aloud to myself, these lines, but I was, like, moving around, and I was like, okay, and then you say this, and then you say that. And because I think I was focusing on something else, then, like, the words came better because I wasn't just, like, sitting still being like, what's that fucking line?
That's because you're it's now you're coming from your subconscious because you're concentrating on the dishes or something.
Yeah.
And you figure out that, oh, I know this better than I do when I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah, it's wild. I think it was a wild discovery where I was like, oh, maybe this is how I should memorize lines in the future.
Things you learn from doing a solo show.
So many things, Phil. So many things. Maybe that I never do one ever again, and this is just the one time.
I don't know. I gotta say, performing solo shows is addictive.
Oh, I believe it.
And once you're done your run, you'll be like, I can't wait to do this again, and you'll have an idea for another solo show.
I know. I'm worried about that.
Because there's something about taking an audience on a journey by yourself.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah. I can't wait. Like, I'm really excited. Like,
it's exhilarating. It's exhilarating. And that's why I think it's so addictive, because of that relationship with the audience. And also afterwards going like, yeah, they came. I did
that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm very excited to see the reactions and hopefully the praise, because I'm like, oh, like, again, this is an earlier thought of mine. Again, if I mess up, there's kind of only like me to blame, right? Like, I'm the only person on stage. But also, if you love it, it's because like I'm the only person on stage. Like, that's kind of my two-person thought, where I was like, just think of, if people really love it, that's all for you, almost. Yeah. Like, it is also for, like, obviously my director and my stage manager they're both freaking amazing. Could not do this show without them. The amount of collaboration that's happened, including like my stage manager is brilliant, and she has offered writing ideas that have been great that we've incorporated, and like very cool set design ideas that, I mean, I don't have any experience in that, and Megan's been amazing. So, but it's like, so I don't do it alone, obviously, but but also it's like 2 weeks away, and I'm also freaking out. So,
well, naturally, that's just the way things are. Now you were talking about your moon research, but also, and you love astrology.
I really do, yeah.
And so how did your love of astrology play into this show?
I think one of the first things that I wrote in one of Luna's monologues was when she introduces herself to the audience, and she says that her and her mother are both water signs. So, and part of this is still on the show, that her mother's a Cancer and she's a Scorpio. But Luna doesn't like astrology, but her mother loves astrology, which again would probably be the opposite of my real life. But something, again, this was an idea that my stage manager had, which is amazing and is now in the show, is that, and I mean, I drop a bit of astrology in, like maybe like sometimes throughout it, but it's really not there that much. But at the beginning, when she's talking about this, my stage manager was like, oh, what? Because I think originally it was just me monologuing about astrology and our differences and our similarities. And my stage manager said, her name is Erica, by the way, she's great. And she said, why don't you have it be like a podcast that she's listening to? And the podcast is about astrology. So it's like one of those like astrology podcasts where it's like, the moon is in blah, 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 and Mercury retrograde is doing this. And I was like, that's an amazing idea. I'm like, so now what we have in that theme is she does still introduce herself as her sign and her mother as one sign, but like she listens to what originally was a monologue, but then we turned it into just a podcast audio track that she listens to. That's like, welcome back to the Cycle podcast, and now we're going to talk about the Cancer, and then the next thing that she blips is like, welcome back, and now we're going to talk about like Mercury retrograde and how that affects the sign of Scorpio. And so that was a really cool thing that wasn't in there originally, but made it so much better than I could have ever. And so much better than me just like monologuing to you about astrology. which I mean, certain people like, but certain people are like, oh my God, we know everyone's obsessed with astrology. We know.
When did you first start on your astrology journey?
Oh, that's super funny. Oh my goodness. When did I? I think the most funny thing is how I've gotten other people into it because of my obsession with it. But my obsession came from my friend Erin, who lives in Winnipeg, and she's a lovely human being. And we did a show together a million years ago. And I think at that time, she was like, into astrology and stuff and would tell me things. And then at the beginning, I think this is funny, is that at the beginning, I was like, oh my God, really? I don't care. None of this is accurate or whatever. And I think I feel like if you talk to anybody that had that point of view and then they get really into astrology, they're like, oh my God, it's way more accurate than you think that it could be. I remember a really funny conversation with one of my best friends who is a Cancer. And we were talking about something, and she was like, Reba, I was reading this thing on Twitter where it was it named all of these kind of characteristics or whatever. And then I realized that person was a Virgo. And she was like, and I just thought that was part of your personality. And she was like, and then I realized that there was more of you. And I was like, yeah, see, this is it's a deep rabbit hole, but so I think from early on, maybe, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 2015, that sounds like the right year that I started kind of being more into it. And then because of my friend Erin, and then now I've just dived so far off the deep end of astrology. But it's kind of nice because through me diving off that deep end, I have also pulled other people with me. And now it's a very normal conversation where I will be like, oh, that's because you're an XYZ, or oh, that's because, or that characteristic is because you're this sign. As an example, I just started a new job recently, and my coworker literally asked me if I had CoStar, and that CoStar is an astrology app.
Oh.
And I'm like, yes, I do. Do you have CoStar? That was it's not necessarily a normal conversation that you bring up, but I was very appreciative of it.
Did they have a sense that you might have that, or were this that
No, I think we were just talking about birthdays or whatever, and they said what their birthday was, and I was trying to I'm normally pretty good at oh, it's that sign, oh, it's that sign.
Right.
And I was just like taking a really long time to do it. And then they were like, oh, do you have CoStar? And I was like, oh, yeah, I do. Well, of course I have CoStar. But that's kind of my, yeah. It's probably, I mean, unfortunately, because I like it so much, it's probably going to slip its way into like everything I write subconsciously.
I mean, why not?
And then, well, the funny thing is, do you know Melanie Darling? I don't know if you do or not, but no. She's a Toronto, well, she's from Winnipeg, but she's a Toronto Canadian now. And we did something during the pandemic, which was all online, that was all about astrology, where we had different actors or, you know, writers or whatnot perform a piece based on their astrological sign. And people loved it. People, like, the people involved loved it. The people that watched it loved it. Like, so I don't know. It's also really silly. It's really silly. It's really fun. It's fun to like this really silly thing that you can take or leave.
The important thing is that it's fun.
Yeah.
Right? If it's not fun, don't
do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it. So, this is not your first Winnipeg Fringe Festival.
Oh my God. No, it's not.
But it's been a little while.
Well, the last time I did a show was 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this will be if we count the ones that I've been in that I had no participatory writing in, this will be 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as far as the Winnipeg Fringe Festival goes, what is your favorite part of the festival?
This is gonna sound like there's too many favorite parts. The city becomes so alive. The Exchange District becomes so alive during that time. And just like the accessibility of like, you can go see a show for, I know like artists, we can complain about, I want you to pay more to see my show because I want, and I mean, I can be bad about that. I can complain about that too. But the fact that you could go see like a really well done show for like $12,
right,
is amazing. Amazing. I get so many cool ideas, inspiration from Fringe more than from any other theater that I have ever seen during our theater season here in Winnipeg. That's where I get inspired, is the Winnipeg Fringe. And also, I get to see my friends. I get to see my friends that don't live here. I get to see my Fringe family that are all super excited for Winnipeg because it's one of the bigger festivals. And everybody just kind of gloms together, hangs out. It's like a 2-week party where we're just, we're making art, we're doing our art, we're staying out, we're hanging out. It's like my Christmas. It really is. That people call it Fringe Miss. I don't know if you guys over there in Toronto do that too.
I mean, people do. People do.
Yeah.
Sort of theater Christmas or Fringe Miss. It's all because it is the time when the Fringe family comes together. And I think there's something different. Toronto, as we record this, the Toronto Fringe is in full swing.
Yeah, it sure is.
But to me, there's something different between being part of the Fringe family in Toronto and then like leaving and going to other fringes, because there's more. I feel like as soon as you are in some of the fringes outside of Toronto, like Winnipeg, like Edmonton, and all the other ones, there's a real camaraderie that's sort of missing from the Toronto Fringe. Artists are constantly like promoting other shows and like going to see each other's shows and genuinely excited about other people's shows, which I think is one of the unique things about going to other fringes.
Yeah, I love going to other fringes. I love, when I can afford it, and when the Cass Lottery is kind to me. It was not this year, but that's okay. And just experiencing different things. So the reason that I haven't done Toronto in the past is because normally your and especially what's happening right now, your Fringe Festival falls during Winnipeg's Folk Festival.
Yes, yeah.
And I love Folk Fest too much. So go to Toronto for
That is fair. That is completely fair.
And also, I think in the past, my tech has normally been, except Fringe this year, Winnipeg Fringe this year is like a week later than I think it normally is, because normally like our tech, the Winnipeg people tech, is like the weekend of Folk Festival, which is normally the weekend before Fringe starts. But this year, for some calendar reason, the Fringe Festival starts on July 19th. So we get like an extra week in between. But normally they're back to back.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember traveling like I think when I went to Winnipeg 12 years ago.
Yeah.
It was not even the last day of Fringe, but it was one of our cast members' last performance.
Yeah.
I think their performance ended at like 3:30, 4:30. We met them with a car. They threw their shit in the car and we started driving.
Yeah.
Because we had like 2 days to get there. And it was quite the trek. So you got to get there fast when they're on each other's heels like that.
Yeah, it's a bit nuts. Except this year might, of course, and maybe this is other things happening in the universe. my tech is actually during the week instead of on the weekend. And I wonder if that's because my director is, Megan's technically from out of town. She has her own show. She's directing my show. She's directing another show. And it's been the first time ever where I've had to tell my work, I'm like, so I have this thing like I have to be at in the middle of the week, and it's going to be a real hot mess, but we're going to figure it out, right? It's not saying that I don't come to work on a Tuesday, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reba, one last thing is, I know that you have one ASL performance.
I do. I'm super pumped.
Have you done an ASL interpreted show before?
I have not, but I'm very excited. I will say this, I know very, very minimal ASL. But when I was younger, when I was like 11 or 12, I had like a mentor friend, and she taught me the alphabet in sign language. So I've known the alphabet for most of my life in sign language. And then I used to also work at camp, and we would often work with, or I would often work with adults with disabilities. So I picked up, I learned some, like, again, minimal ASL. So I know like a few things.
Yeah.
I by no means am not as experienced and as wonderful as the ASL interpreters are, or people that know ASL, but I'm very excited. I'm at the, even thinking about it, I'm like, oh no, like I'm just going to be so distracted as an actor because I will just want to watch them.
that is tough. That is really tough.
Because
especially
it's so cool what they do.
You're only going to have like one shot at it with them, and it's like, you'll kind of want to see what they're doing.
Yeah. But no, I'm very grateful for that opportunity, because I think we should all be, if we have the funding, if we have the opportunity to make theater more accessible, then that is definitely something we should all be working towards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Reba, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Phil. This was lovely. Thank you for having me on. I love a podcast. I love a theater podcast.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.